Hey, everybody. Welcome from high atop the BGW recording studios at 1616 Camden Avenue. You see what I got to put up with? I mean, I'm starting another year of this. Come on, man.
It made me smile and laugh. So there you go.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, welcome to 2023. Ready or not, here we go. Hopefully everybody had a good Christmas break and you're ready to rock and roll, because we are too. And I'm doing a shout out. So this was a Christmas gift. This is the logo of my son's shoe company called Flux Footwear. They just launched just under 2 years ago, but last year they eclipsed the 96% of all privately held businesses. And this is a stat from Scaling Up. So that book's probably about 10 years old at this point, but it was an interesting stat. 96% of the 28 million privately held companies in the United States were under 1 million. 4%, only 4% were under 5 million. And then it gets really small, much bigger than that, which is really interesting. But they just clipped over their first $1 million revenue goal last year in 2022. So I think that's pretty cool. So we love working with businesses that are growing, and that's always exciting. And it's even more exciting when it's your own kids' company. So anyway, you guys know the drill. Hit us up with the Q&A. Let's make sure that the chat is enabled, because we're going to get, oh yeah. So we're going to probably get hit. All right, good. Joe, you're on it. Hey, it's good to see you, Joe. So thank God that Zoom changed their things, evidently, I guess. Yeah. So thanks, Carrie. It's pretty cool. Anybody interested in Flux shoes, they have $23 off this today, and today only. They add it for the first few days of 2023, but they're the most comfortable shoes I've ever had. And it's not just because they're my sons, but anyway, so we're ready to rock and roll. Adam, I'll bet you've got a thought or two about round 7 of the House of Representatives.
It's freaking hysterical. You know, I got to tell you, so probably will get me in trouble with somebody, at some level, but even though I don't necessarily agree with everything that he's voted for, I was a big fan of Ben Sass's demeanor, who's the senator from Nebraska that just retired to become the president of the University of Florida system. And I heard him the other day where he was just talking about, what's going on. And he made a funny comment. He made a funny comment that Joe, I vote Donald's. That's funny. He had a funny comment that that one of the most functional committees in Congress was the Cybersecurity Committee, because it didn't meet in public and no cameras were allowed, so people couldn't preen. And I just thought, man, there's something to that. Like, I wonder what would happen if they just banned, press other than in isolated spots, in isolated times, like they used to do in the old days when there were only 3 networks, and just didn't have the ability for 24/7 news. What would actually happen. But I think what you see with the 6, votes, I mean, it is an embarrassment, but at the same time, I think from our perspective, in terms of what we've been talking about this webinar, on these webinars, is, I mean, it just further provides the evidence that we need to feel pretty comfortable. There will not be tax rate changes. I mean, nothing's for permanent, but at least for the next 2 years, I feel like the likelihood of a tax rate change is going to be close to 0. Given what you're seeing. I mean, as close to 0 as you can possibly get without saying it's absolute. it's pretty damn close to zero, because, if you just think about, how could it happen? It's got to pass the House and the Senate. It just seems like there's zero scenario where, you're going to get something past the House that the Senate will also pass, that the president would subsequently sign. So I feel like, from a planning perspective, and kind of count on rates, pretty likely being the same as they are. And, kind of the next thing we need to keep our eye on is, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expiring in the end of 2025 and going into 2026, which is going to mean tax rate changes for everybody if they don't do something about it. Other than that, we're just going to see the natural progression of the stuff that's already, out there, which is, bonus depreciation kind of phasing out. And then that's really, that's really about it in terms of, boogeymans, for any of us to potentially be worried about as small business owners. And then the only other thing that I would hit on too, is it's segue into some of the stuff Jack was going to hit on in terms of finding and retaining talent. I always get asked a lot of questions, hey, what do we think in terms of economic predictions, tough to find people and stuff like that. And, it's pretty tough, out there finding people. What I would say is, at least y'all weren't the subject of a Wall Street Journal article. If you didn't see it, the Wall Street Journal ran an article on accountants leaving the profession. So, I get it. Construction, everybody's suffering, trying to find people. At least you're not the subject of nationwide news. That's how hard we're having it, folks, is we are the subject of nationwide news. So, we're in the same boat as everybody else in terms of trying to hire and retain people. So anyway, that's what I got.
What about, think about this, we don't have to address it now, but tax rate changes, tax bracket changes because of inflation, that might be worth talking about. And I also want to hit you up with what are the things that business owners can be doing now while they're still while New Year's resolutions haven't completely fallen off the bus, unless they've been go to the gym and they're, day 4, like we're done. What are the things they can be doing to make sure that it's a seamless and a less painful process and just getting documents back and forth to tax preparers? So just think about that.
Okay.
Jack, I know you've got stuff that you want to talk about.
All right. Happy New Year. I was tempted to leave up the Tar Heel background from the last seminar that we did for a number of reasons. First of all, because Tar Heels won last night, but more importantly, in any Tar Heel or any other person than a Duke fan appreciates, anyone other than Duke. NC State, where my daughter is currently attending, but just kicked Duke's butt yesterday, which was awesome way to start out because they played first and then Tar Heels played second. So it was a wonderful 4 hours of basketball, despite the fact that apparently there was a medical emergency in the crowd in the Dean Dome yesterday that they were very appropriately not showing on live television, but just saying that, it's being attended to and that the person left and was conscious when that person left. And I think a lot of people's sentiments are heightened with respect to the recent football collapse. And I don't know, I haven't heard anything more other than early this morning that he's still in critical care and being taken care of, possibly still on a ventilator. But and it sounds like they are going to play the intended football games this weekend, and everybody's going to be wearing some sort of tribute. So we'll see how that goes. But what I wanted to talk about first was, and because we didn't really get into this except in trying to predict what was going to be or pass in the $1.6 trillion spending bill, is what actually got through. And so on the higher level categories, so it was 1.65 trillion omnibus bill funding the government through September of next year. And a couple of the keynote provisions were that it increased defense funding by $76 billion. So the defense budget is $858 billion going into the next fiscal year. Domestic spending totals $772 billion in non-defense discretionary spending, up almost 6% from $730 billion from last year. And then it includes $45 billion for Ukraine and allies. And originally, President Biden had requested 34 billion or 37 billion. So they raised it up to 45 billion. Apparently, President Zelensky's appearance in Congress and coming over to the US and meeting with the president maybe had a significant impact on the allocation of those funds. I know that there are people on both sides of that. It's like, wait a minute, you know, why am I funding this war across seas? But it's, you know, the same argument or discussion in any conflict that we get involved in outside of our borders, you know, and so understand that people are you take sides. And then there was $40 billion to help communities hit by hurricane storms and wildfires. There was an interesting article, it may have been in the Business Journal, that was specific to North Carolina and our representatives in Congress. So senators and representatives that got certain provisions, a little bit of money here and there. And some of it was pretty ridiculous. It was like one US representative was retiring and there was a big parade, and it was apparently a very extravagant parade. So, but it goes to the political nature of politics that, you know, give everybody a little bit to make them happy to get the consensus that you need, kind of thing. Some other things that were in there were changes to how the Electoral College votes are counted. If you recall, about last year this time, there was a little I was going to use the word kerfluffle, but I think that is more of my father's generation word. So I apologize for even thinking that. Okay, there was an incident, and part of it was that the vice president was going through what has always been a ceremonious type process, but this bill makes it very clear that Congress's role in ratifying the state's electoral college votes is ministerial, and that the vice president's role is merely to count the votes publicly. And not that there can be any change or outcome to the vote counting because it's already been done. So it's ceremonial. Changes to the retirement system about minimum distributions and other stuff, which maybe we'll talk about at a different time. Help for Afghan immigrants, permanent funding for meals for children during summer. Obviously geared towards low income families that have to buy extra groceries where it's normally subsidized during the school year. That is I will tell you, a big problem here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and in other areas that are close to us geographically and close to our hearts. And so there was, the number is 29 million children that this program is going to help. Ban on TikTok on government devices, which we've heard about. An extension to Boeing's 737 MAX deadline. They were supposed to have a plan together by December 27th, basically say, yes, these planes are suitable for flight. And apparently they got an extension because they have to install new cockpit alerting systems to help pilots resolve emergencies in the wake of 2 deadly crashes. I don't remember when the original crashes were, but it seems like a lot of time has passed for them to get their act together. But we'll keep my criticism to myself other than saying that. Break for the lobster industry. Apparently, it is okay that we are continuing to impact North Atlantic whales so that the lobster industry can continue to give us our lobsters through 2029 without increased regulation. You can kind of hear a little bit of my sarcasm in that comment. Tightening rules on conservation easements. So let's talk about what didn't make it, which is very interesting. Okay. If you are a banker and you handle marijuana related transactions, the bipartisan provision regarding that did not pass. So you're good to go to continue banking your marijuana drug dealers. Habitat protection, to restore habitats for struggling species, apparently again, where that's not as important to deal with species that are becoming extinct. So we're not going to spend any more money on that. Business and family tax changes. There was a 2017 tax law that took effect starting this year, and there was an attempt to reverse it, and that failed. Here's another good one too. Well, it depends on which side you're on, but regarding cocaine sentencing, that they wanted to eliminate disparity between federal sentencing between drug offenses involving crack cocaine and powder cocaine. And so you can kind of put this in perspective. You get the same penalty, and this was since the 1980s, for possession of 5 grams of crack cocaine as possessing 500 grams of the more expensive powder cocaine. So, kind of do the math and figure out where, okay, you need to be if you're doing your cocaine to, again, sarcasm, in doing your cocaine. So, okay. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's anything you guys want to throw in there before I kind of go into the next topic, which is about salaries and paying employees and retention and that kind of stuff in 2023.
So I got a question for the audience. Any things that are burning on your hearts and minds that you want us to address? And by the way, we are going to be launching a poll next week, not this week, but next week after each one of these things, that you guys can just say, hey, this topic is really important to me. So you can do it anonymously if that's an important thing to you, but we would love to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. So if you got something that's burning on your heart and it doesn't have to do with Washington, D.C. and its brokenness or anything else, that's fine. We're here to serve you. And so that's why we're doing this. So anyway, Jack, one other thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to give away one of your gift cards. So if anybody knows what week this is, since this is the first one of 2023, there might be a Starbucks gift card in it for you, thanks to Jack and Shoemaker Law. So seriously, hey. Oh, Caleb, you have been asleep at the wheel. No. 133, you are way short. Sorry, bud, but it's good to see you up here. You can go to our post and you can find it. All right, so
Sandra threw in a vote there too.
Oh, I didn't see that one. What'd she have? Papa Joe, 1 million. It feels that way at times. 143. Oh, Sandra, you're close, but no cigar. Not quite. So, Jack, keep rolling.
All right. So, I found an interesting article. And actually, if you are any of you are subscribers to the Charlotte Business Journal, the paper version, I think you can get the electronic version for free, or at least kind of the minimum of it, or whatever the first level is. So there's this concept that they started last year called the Playbook, and once a week they have articles in relation to business. So at the risk of sharing with you one of my sources of where I get information to have discussions in this forum, I think there's a lot of good information, and they're cataloging it. So you can go back to, if there's something that you missed, maybe, if heaven forbid you had to miss our show at 11 o'clock on Thursdays, that you could go back and find this stuff. But so there was an article prior to New Year's called How to Approach Salaries and Pay in the New Year. And so this was essentially an interview of the senior executive director at Robert Half International, and some of his thoughts. And there were other people that were contributing to this, but to give you kind of frame it and give you a little bit of the statistics, salary budgets for U.S. employees are projected to grow an average of 4.1% this year, which is the highest since 2008. Average raises were budgeted at 4% heading into 2022. They didn't provide information heading into this year, but the implication is that that percentage is going to be higher, and not surprising, because we'll talk about. I also found some other information about Gen Z. And we'll talk about what that is, and I mean, what the information was on that. So many businesses found themselves paying significant premiums to attract or retain workers in 2022. No surprise for those of you that are paying others to do work. Even so, majority of employees, 55% still feel unpaid, according to a recent survey by Robert Half. Some other numbers. The survey found employers still feel emboldened by the state of the job market, with 56% of professionals likely to ask for higher pay than they were a year ago. More than 40% of workers say they would consider changing employers for a 10% increase in pay. So there is your benchmark as to maybe what you need to do or what the expectations are. Now, is that just because 10% is half of what was given to a certain individual in Christmas vacation because he got like a 20% raise, right? So 10%, just kind of a random number. All right, but it says a scary percentage when considering the high number of job openings.
I thought it was last year's bonus plus add 10%. We're gonna have somebody's gonna need a fact check.
Oh yes,
It was last year's bonus and add 10%.
I think it was add 20%, but you're right. It was an add-on.
Someone's gonna need to find that.
All right, gift card to whoever figures that out, because that's gonna.
By the way, Sandra got the week right on the second attempt. So Sandra, good job. It was week 141 today. 143. Your first attempt is in 2 weeks.
All right. Okay. All right. Talking about pay raises. So it was recommendations on how you should approach your pay increases. Some of this is kind of like no duh information, but I'm going to say it anyway. Get ahead of the issue. Wise to prioritize and pay up for the best workers before they get an offer elsewhere. Be creative. Small businesses can't often compete with larger counterparts on salary alone, but they often have more flexibility on perks. We've talked about this before where, okay, what can you do in a non-monetary situation setting? And a lot of it, if you remember, focused on culture. And it was, what do you have going on in the office that makes people want to come through those front doors on a daily basis, 5 days a week, or maybe you've implemented a 4-day-a-week work week. Think long-term. Likely with a slowdown, companies need to think carefully about how high they're willing to go with raises to avoid being stuck with a salary that's too high. So kind of the opposite, which is you need to go high enough, but not too high that you're going to be stuck with paying somebody and then being stuck paying someone who maybe isn't producing, but you're afraid to let them go because hopefully you have a rebound and the economy in general has a rebound. The kind of parting comments is we have to give them raises. Employees are still seeing lots of solicitations, and just coming to the reality that despite you telling your employees, don't talk about this with anyone else, that they're going to do it. And they will have the empirical data. They will have spreadsheets that will say, okay, this is what they're getting. This was the increase. And so how do you combat that? And then the answer in this article was explain it and say, okay, this is kind of like, well, first of all, you need to have some sort of standard and you're going to have some variations. But I mean, basically say, okay, a 3-year person, 4-year person, 5-year person, positions, et cetera. So at least have that grid in your own mind, maybe even on paper. You may not show it to that person, but at least be able to explain why this person, you seem to be working harder than another person. Why is there a pay discrepancy? And hopefully you'd be able to justify it other than the fact that they've been here longer and it's linked to production. Build in raises to meet not only inflation, cost of living increases, but also build in raises that attract talent. So again, some just empirical data, some no-duh comments, and then some actual interesting recommendations and perceptions and et cetera for you guys to contemplate.
Oh, couple things have just come in here worthy of discussion. First of all, Robert Mayetta, he's got like a treasure trove of Starbucks cards because, rightfully so, because
Yes.
you're getting this stuff right. But last year bonus plus 20%, no pay rate change.
Yeah, I've met my match and have been bested in movie trivia battle by Jack Santinello. Let the date be known, people.
But here's the thing. Okay, Robert, you're going to have to work for it harder. I expect a video of exactly how, and I can't even remember the guy's name, but I would say, it's like, didn't he say something like, take last year's bonus and add 20%, like the way he said it. I need
how it happened because I just watched it.
So Robert, you want your card? I expect a video
There you
a
go.
remake of that scene.
In real life, the actor is Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's older brother.
Oh, I didn't know
Also,
that.
also known as the manager of the caddies in Caddyshack.
Wow.
Didn't know that. Now I can see the
Cameo.
resemblance.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Do you remember the character's name? Cousin Eddie said it, but I just can't remember what it was.
He said it was Chevy Chase in his tirade
Yes.
gave his name, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
So, take last year's bonus and let's say 20%.
No, writing doesn't count. I want a video. Sorry. Nope.
Yeah. I'm not tech savvy enough. Oh, that's a
That
problem.
was not
Mr. Burns.
Mr. Burns.
But back to the more serious topic. This is an interesting question raised by Papa Joe. Do remote workers deserve the same level of increases as house workers? So here'd be my question back to you. If you have a remote worker that slays it in meeting objectives, has your back, you know that they are dependable, is there any reason why you would penalize a remote worker versus somebody that shows up and does, gopher hopping above the cube walls because they're logging time? That's my question back.
No, it's a good question, Joe, and I think I'm just going to give my own opinion on it, just based on my observation of having to live through the remote work scenario, is that, if you kind of look at pre-COVID and ask this question, there were really two versions of remote workers. Version number one is, the somewhat commission-based sales force. I had a lot of friends, basically everybody that I knew that worked out of their home pre-COVID. And I'd like to think that I'm representative. Somebody else has other data points. I'd love to hear them, but everybody that worked out of their home office pre-COVID fell into two categories. Category number one is, performance-based compensation that was highly variable based on their production, meaning like, I work out of my house, and if I don't actually work, I don't get freaking paid. That's it. I mean, I had basically every friend that I know or have that's in sales, that's their deal. Like, did not go to an office, hated the office, worked out of the house because they love the flexibility, keeping their own schedule, but they also knew if they did not work, they did not get paid. So they're highly motivated to work. Category number two is look, I didn't really sign up for a career in this deal. I just wanted to go in and kind of do a job and, get paid fairly for that job. And there may be a lot of loyalty, and, there may be, some culture that goes along with that in the remote workforce. But at the end of the day, the nature of the relationship was somewhat transactional in nature. Those were the two people I knew. So in category number B, which, if you look at BGW, like that describes kind of our workforce, which is not commission based, workforce. It's salary type workforce. those people that were working remotely, it was kind of a transactional relationship where they weren't expecting a lot of craziness in terms of raises, promotion, and bonuses, because that they just accepted that's part of my deal is this remote working thing. Like that's part of my compensation is called flexibility, that I can't put a monetary value on it, but it has value to me. Other companies that tried that pre-pandemic, like Bank of America, I mean, they built all these little satellite touchdown centers for people. They got rid of them all because they did not work for them, and they felt that people were stagnating in their careers by not being in the office. That's a long way of saying that this is still a hard topic that nobody really has a super definitive, absolutely great answer to. So what I can tell you in BGW world, because we still struggle with it, it's like I could be a jerk and say tomorrow, everybody's back in the office, dang it. And what I'll hear is the telephone ringing of all the headhunters that are, calling saying, oh man, you can do whatever you want, plus a raise. When it comes to remote working. So I think that, from a performance standpoint, I'm pretty well aligned with Gary in the sense that if the two jobs are equal, the pay ought to be equal. But I think in BGW's world, what we have to place a value on in terms of the person that's in the office relative to the person that's not is the training of the new people and the mentorship. So that's the part that we haven't figured out how to replicate in a remote setting. So if I view that, if I use the Gary test of, hey, it's two equal jobs, you really need to drill down into the job itself to say, is it really equal? Because I could have, two tax managers that the job description is equal, but they don't have equal performance because the one in the office is the person that all the staff people go to ask questions, and they're really providing the bulk of the training, whereas the person that's remote is not. So they're not equal anymore. Therefore the person in the office is doing more and should be rewarded for that, because that comes at a cost to them, to do that training. So I think that if it truly is equivalent performance, why would you discriminate, just because you don't see their butt in the seat? But I think you really got to be careful about making sure that the performance is equivalent. So, and I don't know, Jack, if you guys seen the same thing at Shoemaker or not.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to tackle, and it's ever evolving. So I totally agree with everything you've said. I mean, you touched on some things as far as the different types of positions but there's also other factors. So is it a younger person that has, is receiving, and this is there was a comment that was made in the comments about undervalued perks. So Joe mentioning that, and I think that is true, but it also depends on the age person. So if someone doesn't have to do daycare 3 times a week because they're home, and they're working, okay, versus someone who may be older, who is like, okay, that really doesn't matter. Are they getting a different perk? And maybe that's irrelevant. Maybe it is more so of, it's just something that is expected. And you read a lot of articles that's just become the expectation, not just on the professional service provider, like an accountant or an attorney, but the support staff related there. And so we have a lot of hybrid situations here in this office that we have navigated through, but you're always going to have the appearance, and I say this, that, why is it fair? Why does that person get this and I only get this? There are some people who absolutely want to come to work, punch a time card, and go home and be done and not have to worry about anything. Certainly there are people, and admittedly, in a firm that's our size across various states, you're going to have people that are working from home that are not as efficient. But you also have others who I know that are at the ready. I mean, there's no difference between, and I'm very fortunate that my assistant is like that. When she is not here, she is at the ready, like as if she's standing right outside my door or at her desk outside my door. I also agree with the issue of mentorship, and that and originally when we first got into all of this, I thought, well, wow, Teams is going to be awesome. And it's going to help us get through this because someone can just hit a button and then it rings up my computer. And if I'm here, I'm going to answer. So what's the difference between that and walking down the hall kind of thing? Well, yeah, that sounds awesome, except for the fact when you hit that button, it says unavailable or whatever it may be, versus me looking out my door, looking down the hall and seeing their door closed. Then 5 minutes later, oh, he's available. Let me go down there and talk to him about that. So there are efficiencies of scale that are lost in that. And then just the camaraderie. We've talked a lot over the past 2 years of about culture. And so how can you, if you are a believer that it is A plus B equals C, meaning compensation culture equals a good work environment, especially in a day and age where compensation has gone crazy. I mean, in any profession, you guys are experiencing this, we're experiencing this, and some people are like, okay, pay the ransom, pay the bounty to attract the talent, because Gen Z and others, which if we have time, we'll talk about, and I have some charts to show you that, they are running the game. They are taking advantage of us. I don't necessarily, the market is what it is. And so I don't feel that way, but I know that our cost structure is different on the associate level than it was in the past, because we're competing against others who are willing to pay a lot more money than they had in the past to attract talent. So back to the, so are you using culture to subsidize maybe less dollars, but you have to have that culture there. And so is by going remote or allowing a lot of that to happen, are you losing the culture with a slow bleed over the past 2 years? And will that continue moving forward? It's those things that we struggle with as kind of managers of our businesses in our respective service lines in the firm, as to how do we balance those things. And I think that will continue on moving forward, because now there's an expectation of, people will come into interviews and one of the first questions is, okay, tell us about the work environment. Am I expected to be here 5 days a week? And that's one of the first questions they ask, not the afterthought.
Yeah.
Whereas usually the initial thought was, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? How much am I going to get paid? What are opportunity for bonuses? And somehow that, what is my work environment going to be, has gotten up to the top, 2 or 3 questions that are asked in an interview.
Speaking, a couple great thoughts and questions that have come in from Bruce and Joe. We'll deal with those really good thoughts, but we just dealt with this question today in our all hands meeting. So we do those once a month, and we're like, hey, first of the year, we're bringing everybody back in for this meeting, which was really good to see everybody again. But I think it's worth talking a little bit about, Adam, what you found when we've been recruiting on campus, what they're looking for, what we're doing, and what the Wall Street Journal article referenced by one of our associates this morning addresses this whole new world of the, remote versus in the office, so.
Yeah, no, that's good, Gary. So what, kind of the life, having been sort of in this conundrum of like, I'm competing against other accounting firms that are offering 100% remote work to people plus a big fat pay raise. It's hard to compete with that. It's like, yeah, I'm going to give you Disneyland tickets all year round. So knowing in my heart that it's like, hey, something's not working around here. We got to do something about it. For me, the light bulb really went off, and then the Wall Street Journal, subsequently kind of confirmed this through its own kind of thoughts and reporting. But, we were at App State at a recruiting event, and, some of the graduates, the people that came through the recruiting event, all said kind of the same thing, which is, hey, what's your office policy? What I found interesting, though, is that they were asking the question not because they really cared about the fact that they had the ability to work remotely. It was actually the opposite. They wanted to know that there was going to be a live body that they could learn from, because they all freaking hated the remote learning experience. And if you think about, new hires and you kind of isolate down to, new people and trying to get them trained and being productive. If a remote training environment worked for that, and it's actually very similar to going to college. I mean, you're learning something you don't know a whole lot about, which is, the job, the craft, my company, the way that we do things, at whatever the company actually is. If that worked remotely, then universities would have ditched their bricks and mortar. There'd be prime real estate right now in Boone that I could be building a nice restaurant on. Instead, they all abandon it. Like they still offer remote learning options if you're sick or you're out of town and not infect people, but that is not the primary mode of learning. The primary mode of learning is not remote. It is live. So I guess my feeling on that is that if the best educational minds in the world couldn't figure out how to do this remotely and said, we're going back to instructor-led courses, getting together in groups and doing stuff, labs where you're doing hands-on lab work, why the hell would I think that I can solve that problem and do any better? Like I'm not an educational expert, so why the hell would I think that it's going to work? I mean, it's funny. It's like, what I'd love to see is like, here, because Gary knows that I'm a big fan of pointing out hypocrisy when I see it. So is Jack. So Jack, this is especially for you that you'll love. What I would love to see is every single person that was at a school board meeting that said, how dare you, sir? How dare you not let my child be live and learning? And I wasn't at a school board meeting, and look, the data supports the fact that we lost a beat, not having live learning. So it's like one of those eternal that I'm in the camp of, yeah, we probably screwed that up as a country and we're more conservative than we needed to be based on the evidence of other countries that went back earlier than we did and what their results are based on ours. But there are a lot of loudmouths at those school board meetings saying, how dare we, do this? I want to see those same people talk about the remote working, and with their employer. Like when their employer says, hey, you need to get your butt back in the office because, we believe in, learning and teamwork and come on. Like I bet, just my feeling, that probably they're not thinking about themselves, when they do that. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. But the point is that, all the evidence is pointing that with new hires in particular, which really applies to, probably people in their first year working for you, when it's really important that you lay a good foundation for them. Remote working doesn't work. So if working doesn't work, somebody's got to be there to train them. Period. So it's like fade and non-complete right there for us.
So tell everybody what we're doing. And it's not that we've got to figure it out. We're still experimenting.
So we're right now we're at 2 days back live, but they're extremely intentional in that they're focused on learning and team interaction, meaning like, it's not like just pick your days, show up, and we hope for the best. They're extremely intentional and focused on learning and team interaction on those 2 days. And we're going to see how that goes. And if it turns out that we're having success with the new hires and they're giving us good ratings that, yep, we're doing good, then that could be permanent for BGW. But if it doesn't work, we're going to add more stuff, that's live. So
I want to go to Bruce's question, which is interesting. What's the current expectation for new and existing employees with respect to perks provided to in-house employees and remote workers? Perks being club memberships, special event participation, fitness and or social or business as examples.
I don't know. I haven't heard any differences there.
We haven't delineated.
I don't think we've delineated. Maybe we've shifted a little bit. And again, I don't like the word pivot because I think it was overused for the past 2 years. But I think that there was and I've seen this in other industries. So my wife is in the medical pharmaceutical industry, and watching what a big, large pharmaceutical company does under certain circumstances has been very interesting. And I've implemented maybe micro versions of that here in my firm, in my office. But to do things like, instead of maybe having a large gathering, sending extra gifts. So we've been receiving more than we have in the past of FedEx and Amazon and UPS packages of stuff. I don't want to say it was necessarily all useful stuff. A lot of it was branded with their logo, but I think it was a way of trying to create community. And some of it was kind of cool. Like there were gift certificates and those kind of things where, imagine the scenario where you have an in-person gathering and you give this stuff away live via some random drawing or whatever it may be, or you give one to everybody. So there are different ways of implementing that. On the larger scale, as far as perks go, it may be that, and I've seen this, whether it's having a company car or fuel being paid for by the company. Well, you're not out there driving around and getting that compensated because I think the rate went up to 65 cents a mile. I remember when it was below 50 cents a mile. And so, and you can kind of, personal miles. And so basically your company's subsidized 65 cents a mile. Let's just face it, the company is subsidizing some of your personal use. And so understanding that there are other things that were put into place as far as a perk goes. So, again, it goes back to, and something that I read out loud to everyone a few moments ago, which is just be creative and find things that people are going to appreciate in lieu of that. On the other hand, I've also, in some cases, done things where if you're not in the room, you got to be present to win. So when I have corporate department meetings, extensive corporate department meetings, so I will invite like our IP group, our employment law group, some of the business litigators, so that we have it's a much larger group. And like, okay, and they find out that I gave away whatever randomly, or gave something to everybody that was present. And like, well, where's mine? And like, where were you? Kind of thing. So,
I like that.
Be creative on both ends. You don't have to give away everything. I think there is, but the enigma is to try to figure out the pathway on what should be in person, what should be otherwise, that kind of thing. So it goes hand in hand with the whole just general concept of being physically present or being able to do things remotely, and the benefits and detriments of going in either direction.
So there are a few good comments that have come in through the chat, and I'll address those. But before I forget, if you are a BGW business client and you have never done the best year ever, put it on your calendar for next week on the 11th. So Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. in person here at BGW CPA 1616 Camden, 5th floor in our community room. Jim Dunn is going to be taking us through that. So I think this is my 4th year doing that with him. And every year is just such a really good, like meaningful deep dive on the thought and process of what do I want to accomplish? And it's just really so fun to go back a year later and see what all happened because of that exercise. So next week, Wednesday, the 11th, from 11 till 1 at BGW, and it's for free, which is really cool. So here are a few thoughts and comments from you guys and questions. So first of all, yes, Joe, BGW is 2 days a week in the office, 2 days a week, not per month. Ideas, thoughts, questions occur many times per day and get lost with remote workers. And that is true. In my experience, are less available than walking into their office. I think that's what we all wrestle with a little bit.
Yeah, and we don't track this because I mean, Jack and I are both in the business of like, hey, we may not bill clients by our time, but it's at least a cost accounting system. So we got to keep track of it. Like, there's no way to really know this, but I think, and maybe Jack, you could give some experience share on your own end. And I expect that most businesses are like this. With a new hire in someone's first 90 days, I'd suspect about at a minimum 25% of their time, if not 50%, at least at BGW, is spent asking somebody else what to do and how to do it. So that kind of confirms Joe's point about like, if there's nobody to ask, because I mean, you just can't ask that question over Teams.
Yeah.
You know, if there's nobody to ask, like what, they're just sitting there, you know, stagnant.
So one
Yeah.
thing that I'll
I
bring
agree.
up about this. So, and this isn't all about my son's company, but it's an interesting thing. So he's 33 years old, and he's got two business partners that they're buying out one of the partners, but two of the partners were in Kearney, Nebraska. One of them got married, moved down to Dallas, Texas, and my son's in Denver. They're all remote. And he's the designer of all that stuff. And they all kind of divided and conquered, but they've all bootstrapped it completely on their own. Well, he misses the camaraderie. Like he would love to get those other guys or his other partner that is still in business with him into the same city at least, you know, but they miss that. So it's an interesting thing. They have the flexibility. They like that flexibility. And that's what we've heard from our folks. Hey, yeah, we like the flexibility, but we need this. We need in person. We need that dynamic. So I think we're all still figuring that out. I'm wondering, Jack, if it isn't worth possibly doing a deeper dive next week in some of these Gen Z nuances, as well as, all right, so we're going into a recession from pretty much what everybody is saying. And maybe if unemployment goes up, the retention issues are not going to be as big, but who knows? And people are using that as a weapon to try to cajole and manipulate people, which I don't recommend. But I think maybe we do a deeper dive next week on that whole Gen Z workforce, remote workforce. It's not just Gen Zs. I mean, we've got guys that are my age that are living in mountain homes that are still knocking it out, but they still came down for our in-person event today, which is awesome. But maybe we go into more of your data next week too on that. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because I look around literally here in my shop and think about, okay, are we really running 2 or 3 different systems of doing business? And is it that there are people here that are in person, there are people that are remote, there are people that are mixed in various ways, as to, is it 2 days a week, 3 days a week, half a day kind of thing? And, is that manageable? We focus on kind of Gen Z because they are attributed the behavior modification genesis in doing things differently. But I know, and I experienced that it's, all right, wait a minute, I need something done. Who is he? It's Tuesday, who's here in the office kind of thing. Or, so, and so, yeah, I think it's worthwhile talking about because, the things that we do that we may have to do in order to attract talent at a certain generation may not be, and is likely not the same that is going to attract a different generation. So if I were to go and try to recruit a lateral partner that is my age in his or her 50s, what is going to attract that person to here versus someone who is just getting out of law school or maybe in their early 30s or so? And it doesn't, and there are variables. So for example, is it someone my age who is maybe, and I'm not there yet, but a grandparent that is, would like to be able to work from home, whereas the presumption is that they're more old school and want to be in the office and understand that is important for a number of reasons. And one of those being a mentor to the younger people, to the newer people. I do agree with your comment that, you know, for the new people coming into the office, they do spend a lot of time on the front end in those first couple weeks, couple months, just trying to figure things out. Not only the core substance, but what they're supposed to be doing. And I've always told, because I was told this as a young associate, that my client is not the client. My client is the partner to whom I am producing work product to then discuss it with the client. So, but I have to know how that partner wants things done. And it's a little bit of chaos because partners want things done differently. Some partners, no matter what I did, what the papers that I would produce were bleeding red. And in one instance, there was one partner who, if you were to look at version 1 of the document and version 5 of the document and presuppose that there was red ink on all 5 versions, version 1 would look a lot like version 5, which was very frustrating, meaning that it reverted back to where I had it originally. But it's just what I had to deal with. That is just that guy's personality. And
wait a second, was Chris Feenstra your partner too? I didn't know he was both an accountant and an attorney.
Oh, tough times. But you know, and so but yeah, so you know, you got to know your audience, and the only way you're going to do that is, you know, being physically near them. So but yes, I think that's going back to your original question and proposition that, yeah, I think we should, there's plenty of things to talk about, not just on the Gen Z level, but once we kind of look at that information, seeing, and I'd be curious to see the audience's thoughts on the implementation of those those surveys that were done, because this is the title. This is Gen Z in their own words. So Gen Z, the sampling is telling us, what are they going to be in the same job in the next 3 years, the next 6 months? What is important to them? You mentioned this before, Adam. You used the word flexibility. That is a key component to this, which is flexibility throughout in various, as far as pay structure, as far as work, workload, and all those other things. But we can dive into that deeper next week, maybe.
So we'll leave with this question from Papa Joe. You've been nice and active today, which is really fun. But I love this question. So he says, back in the day, education majors had their college tuition waived if they agreed to teach after they graduate. Would a similar concept work with accountants? Ooh.
Now, I'm actually going to put that on our issues list to bring up on Monday at our leadership team.
I think it's awesome.
Like sometimes that kind of gets back to, do you pay more for people in the office versus remote work? I think this is a good example. That's a great idea, Joe.
Yeah.
Paying a bonus for people who are willing to train versus those that are not.
Yeah, because otherwise it comes down to the goodness of somebody's heart, and sometimes their goodness goes,
Right.
So, hey, we're at the top of the hour. We're just fast approaching it. It's good to see you all, even though I don't see y'all, but I see your names and I see the texts and the chats that come up. So it's really cool to see y'all. It's good to see you, Jack. Happy New Year to you. It's always good to be in person with, you know, Adam Boatsman, and he keeps getting thinner and thinner, though. It's harder to see him these days. It's amazing. Your transformation has been really amazing. So really honored to see how that's been going. So anyway, we'll be putting this thing up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel this afternoon. Thank you guys for showing up all the time. And if there's anything that we can do in the meantime, let us know. If you don't have my email address, it's gfrey@trustbgw.com. Happy to help in any way we can. Jack, thanks again, and bring that data with you for next week.
Of course. Thank you, guys. Have a good rest of the week.
Have a great week. See y'all. Bye-bye.